You were taught that effort liberates, that working more is the answer, that persistence is dignity. And perhaps that's why you're still exactly where you started. Not because you didn't try, but because the type of effort they taught you to value was designed to keep you busy, not free. There's a difference between movement and direction, and you've spent years confusing the two. The effort they promised you as a solution was carefully positioned as an obstacle, not by accident, by silent design. There's a type of effort that builds, and there's the type that only proves you're willing to obey. You don't yet know which one you practice, but you'll recognize it when you realize that exhaustion was never the problem. It was always the broken compass nobody taught you to question. Effort is revered, celebrated, romanticized in every success story you've ever consumed. It occupies the center of every narrative about ascension, and that's exactly why it works so well as a containment tool. When something is universally accepted as virtue, it stops being analyzed. It starts being repeated. And everything that's repeated without analysis transforms into ritual. Rituals don't need to make sense. They just need to be performed. You were conditioned to believe that the intensity of your effort proves the value of your intention, that the more you wear yourself down, the closer you are to something better. And this belief was planted so deep that any suggestion that effort might be sabotaging you sounds like disguised laziness. But this isn't about working less. It's about realizing you were taught to work within limits that were never yours. Invisible limits, accepted as natural, sustained by a logic you never chose, but defend as if it were your own. The effort that keeps you trapped doesn't feel like prison. It feels like responsibility. It feels like character. It feels like the right path. And that's precisely why you never questioned where it really leads. There's a silent mechanism behind every economic structure. It's not taught, it's not debated, it just operates. And one of its most efficient functions is transforming effort into fuel for maintenance, not change. You were trained to see effort as investment, but investment presupposes return. And when the return doesn't come, you don't question the system, you question yourself. You think you didn't try hard enough, that you lacked consistency, that you lacked sacrifice, and then you double down. Work more hours, cut more expenses, postpone more dreams. And the system silently thanks you, because the more you exert yourself within the rules it defined, the more it sustains itself. Misdirected effort is the perfect fuel for perpetuating inequality. It keeps you too busy to notice you're running in circles, too tired to question the track, too proud to admit you might be running in the wrong direction. And what's most disturbing is that this type of effort generates identity. You start defining yourself by it. You become someone who works hard, who doesn't give up, who withstands pressure. And when effort becomes identity, questioning its effectiveness becomes questioning who you are. The official narrative about wealth is simple. Study, work, save, invest, be disciplined, and eventually you get there. It's a comforting formula, linear, fair, and completely disconnected from the reality of how wealth actually concentrates. Wealth isn't built by brute effort. It's built by position, by access, by asymmetric information, by structures that favor those already inside. Effort participates, but as a supporting actor, never as the protagonist. You've already noticed that the people who get rich aren't necessarily those who work the most. They're those who work in systems that multiply return, and those systems aren't available to someone too busy working to survive. There's a layer of economic operation that functions through leverage of capital, of network, of information, of legal structure. And while you're exerting yourself to earn one more hour of overtime, someone is structuring a holding company that will pay less tax on 10 million than you pay on 30,000. The effort they taught you to value is operational effort, execution effort, effort that keeps the machine running. But it's not the type of effort that builds the machine, and it's certainly not the type that makes you its owner. You've already noticed how the discourse about effort is always directed downward, how it's never demanded of those who already have. Nobody questions whether the heir exerted effort, whether the investor who was born with capital sacrificed, whether the executive who entered through family connections deserved it. Effort is demanded of those who start with nothing, and sold as an exclusive virtue of that group, as if the absence of effort is what separates rich from poor. when in reality what separates them is access to systems that make effort unnecessary. The wealthy don't work less because they're lazy. They work less because they have structure, because they have other people working for them, because they have money working for them, because they have time to think about strategy while others are busy executing. And meanwhile, you are convinced that the solution is to try even harder. Work weekends, take on side jobs, wake up earlier, sleep less, give up leisure, rest, relationships, all in the name of a better future that never arrives because you're too busy building someone else's future. The effort they sell you as liberation is, in practice, a form of capture. You exert yourself so much just to keep functioning that there's never energy left to question the game. And when you're too exhausted to think, you accept what they tell you. You obey, you repeat. There's a rarely discussed concept, the concept of directed effort, and it changes everything. Effort directed toward maintenance keeps you alive, but doesn't move you. You pay bills, fulfill obligations, sustain the structure, and at the end of the month, you're exactly where you started. This is the effort most know, and it's the effort most die practicing. Effort directed toward asset acquisition changes the equation. You work to build something that generates return independent of your time. But to do this, you need initial capital, margin, space to fail. And someone spending 100% of their energy just to survive has no margin. This is the trap. To exit maintenance effort, you need slack. But to have slack, you need to exit maintenance effort. And the only way to break this cycle is with external resource, inheritance, investment, luck, something that gives you the margin that effort alone will never give you. And then you realize, effort isn't enough. It never was. But they taught you it is. Because while you believe that, you don't question the system. You question yourself. And you keep trying. And you stay trapped. The language surrounding effort was carefully constructed to glorify it. Motivational phrases, success stories, icons who made it through hard work. And each of these narratives hides what really happened. When you hear that someone got rich working hard, what they don't tell you is that this person also had access to credit, to network, to privileged information, to an expanding market, to a window of opportunity that's already closed. But the story is edited, and what remains is the effort part. Because that's the part that keeps you believing you can too. And you can. As long as you have the same conditions, which are rarely mentioned. Because if they were, the narrative would lose its power. And the system would lose its fuel. What they sell you as meritocracy is, in reality, survivalism. Few make it. And when they do, it's in spite of effort, not because of it. But the official story ignores the in spite of, and celebrates the effort, because that's what keeps most running. You've already noticed that the wealthiest people don't talk about effort. They talk about opportunity, about timing, about decisions, about structure. And when they talk about work, it's always smart work, never hard work. Hard work is what's left for those who have no choice. And it's sold as virtue, so it seems like choice. So you feel proud of being exhausted. So you ignore that exhaustion isn't a sign of progress. It's a sign that you're burning energy without proportional return. There's a type of effort that's strategic, that's calibrated, that knows when to stop, that understands that rest also builds, that values mental clarity above hours worked. But this type of effort requires margin, and margin requires capital. So what happens is that those with capital can exert effort intelligently, and those without exert effort desperately. And desperate effort rarely generates wealth. It generates survival. And survival doesn't accumulate. It just maintains. Effort also functions as a tool of moral control. When you work hard and don't prosper, the blame falls on you. You didn't try hard enough, weren't consistent enough, didn't have discipline. And this keeps you quiet. Because if you accept that the problem is your effort, you don't question the system. You don't organize. You don't demand change. You just try harder, and try again, and again, until you convince yourself you're really not good enough. And meanwhile, those at the top don't need to justify themselves, don't need to prove effort, don't need to validate merit, because wealth, by itself, is seen as proof of competence. even if it came from inheritance, from exploitation, from luck, from corruption. The origin doesn't matter. What matters is the result. So you have a system where effort is demanded of those who don't have, and dispensed for those who do. And both believe this is fair, because both were taught that effort generates wealth. And if you're not wealthy, it's because you didn't try. And if you are wealthy, it's because you did. And nobody questions this logic because it sustains the order. Now think about the type of effort you practice. Not the effort you romanticize, but the real effort. What you do every day. For whom does this effort generate value? For you, or for another structure? You work to pay rent, and the value of your effort goes to the property owner. You work to pay financing, and the value goes to the bank. You work to consume, and the value goes to corporations. And in the end, what remains for you is exhaustion. This is the effort most know. Effort that feeds systems, that pays interest, that sustains others' profits, and that never accumulates for the one executing, because it was designed not to accumulate. And the most subtle part of all this is that you were taught to feel pride in this effort, to see dignity in it, to defend that this is how it has to be. Because if you question it, you'll seem like you're avoiding responsibility, and you don't want to seem irresponsible. So you continue, working, exerting yourself, believing that eventually it will work out, that eventually the effort will pay off. And maybe it will, for a statistical minority, who will serve as examples to keep the rest believing. There's an interesting phenomenon. The poorer you are, the more you need to exert yourself just to maintain the basics. And the more you exert yourself to maintain the basics, the less energy remains to build anything beyond the basics. The wealthy can fail, can rest, can experiment, because they have margin. The poor can't fail, can't rest, can't experiment, because they have no margin. And without margin, effort becomes maintenance, and maintenance doesn't generate ascension. You've already noticed that nobody gets rich just by saving. Saving is important, but it's not sufficient, because economic systems are structured to erode savings. Inflation, interest, taxes, devaluation. And while you save 10, the system erodes 8. To truly exit, you need multiplication, and multiplication requires risk, and risk requires margin, and margin requires capital, and capital requires that you've already exited, so the cycle closes, and those inside stay inside, and those outside stay outside. And the effort? The effort only determines how dignified you'll be while staying where you are. The narrative of effort also serves to fragment resistance. When each person believes their failure is individual, nobody organizes collectively. Each thinks the problem is only theirs, that others succeeded, that you're the exception. And this prevents any kind of mobilization, because mobilization requires collective consciousness, and collective consciousness requires you to realize that what happens to you isn't individual failure, it's structural pattern. But while you're busy exerting yourself, you don't have time to notice patterns, don't have time to talk, to compare, to understand that what you live, millions live, and that maybe the problem isn't with you. Individual effort is the perfect narrative to disarticulate collective resistance, because it transforms systemic issue into moral issue, and moral issue is resolved individually, with more effort, more sacrifice, more obedience. And meanwhile, those who benefit from the structure continue benefiting, without resistance, without questioning, without threat, because everyone is too busy working. You probably know someone who works harder than you, who wakes up earlier, who sleeps less, who works more hours, and who still isn't better off. Maybe even worse, because the body can't take it, because the mind can't take it, because life can't take it, and still this person continues, because stopping seems like giving up, and giving up seems like failure, so they exert themselves until breaking, and when they break, the system discards them, and puts another in their place, who will also exert themselves until breaking, and the cycle continues. This is the human cost of a narrative that treats effort as universal solution. You destroy yourself believing you're building yourself. Sacrifice health, relationships, sanity, all in the name of progress that never arrives. And what's most cruel is that when someone breaks, the blame still falls on them. Didn't have resilience, couldn't handle the pressure, wasn't strong enough. And it's never questioned why someone should need to be strong enough to survive the basics. Here's the truth nobody wants to say. The effort they taught you to value was designed to keep you exactly where you are. It wasn't created to liberate you. It was created to occupy you. Because while you're occupied, you don't question, don't organize, don't demand. You just obey. And obeying is all the system needs you to do. Wealth isn't the result of effort. It's the result of position, of access, of structure, and of a very specific type of effort that only makes sense when you already have margin to apply it. You can work your entire life, can sacrifice, can give up everything, and still die poor. Because effort without strategic direction, without capital, without network, without information, is just movement. And movement without direction is just wear. Maybe you never noticed. But there's a reason every motivational discourse focuses on effort, and never on redistribution, never on progressive taxation, never on equitable access to capital, never on dismantling structural privilege, because those things would disturb the system, and the system doesn't want to be disturbed. It wants to be maintained, and the best way to maintain it is to convince you that the problem isn't the system. It's the lack of individual effort. So you have millions exerting themselves, sacrificing themselves, exhausting themselves, and thinking this is the path, when in reality, it's just the most efficient way to ensure nothing changes. Because real change would require questioning why someone can inherit $1 billion without effort, and why you need to work 40 years to have minimum retirement. But these questions aren't asked, because they were replaced by the wrong question. The question they taught you to ask is, how much harder do I need to try? When the right question would be, why do I need to try so hard just to survive while others are born with everything guaranteed? And then you arrive here, knowing this, and maybe nothing changes. Because knowing isn't enough when the system doesn't give you margin to act differently. You still need to pay rent, still need to eat, still need to work. So you return, and you exert yourself, because that's what remains. But now at least, you know, that effort isn't virtue, it's a tool, and that the way you were taught to use it wasn't for your benefit. Maybe this liberates you, maybe it doesn't. But at least you won't confuse movement with progress anymore, exhaustion with merit, obedience with dignity, because the only thing worse than being trapped is being trapped and thinking you're free.